Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Spill the Tea, a podcast by Penang Institute. My name is Pei Jung, and I will be your host today. So today, we are very fortunate to have with us Datuk Judy Cheng-Hopkins. So Datuk Judy Cheng-Hopkins has had an illustrious career of over 30 years in the United Nations, spanning across different UN agencies covering development and humanitarian work in Africa and Asia. In 2009, Datuk Judy was appointed as Assistant Secretary General for Peacebuilding Support by then UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, where she became one of the few Malaysians to achieve a high rank in UN organizations to date. Judy is also a huge advocate for gender equality and women empowerment. We are very privileged to have Datuk Judy here with us today. Thank you for joining us, Datuk Judy.
My pleasure.
So, first, to start off our podcast session, I thought about maybe asking you to tell us your journey to joining UN and other international organizations. So my first question is, has joining the UN or any international organization, has it been an ambition since young? What actually inspired you to look towards the UN?
Good question. Actually, the answer, to be honest, is not at all. Yeah, no clue. Growing up in idyllic Penang, where, I went to St. George's and Xavier's. A lot of my friends were, aspiring basically to have good professions, but coming back to Malaysia, obviously, and coming back to Penang. So I was definitely in that group. But, I suppose things come your way, and then before one door opens and another one opens, another one opens. So I went to the States as a AFS, American Field Service exchange student. I was not very politically not a lot of social conscience, I admit, growing up here. As I said, idyllic lifestyle. But in America, I was fortunate to live with a very political family, very high-powered political family in the East Coast. That really instilled in me a lot of the social values that I have today. So they really influenced me in issues of politics, of development, equality. And when I went to college, of course, that drew me to these topics. And before you knew it, I knew I wanted a career in development. I was fascinated by what made certain countries develop so fast and others languish behind. You remember, I used to love to talk about the anatomy of a failed state. Yes. You can see a failed state appearing right before your eyes. All the indicators are there. Yes. Why do they let it drop like that? Why is corruption so endemic? And why don't people do anything about corruption? And why others, so conscientious? Anyway, so that drew me to the development field. And at that time, it so happened that Columbia University had set up the School of International Affairs with a lot of very well-known professors. I was so excited I got in. And from there, as I say, the rest is history, in fact. The school was so good at producing people in development work that the university came to recruit. I didn't even have to apply. And then before that, I was in Africa for 10 years. Never dreamed in my life this girl from Penang would spend 10 years in Africa. My children grew up there. My husband worked there as a professor at university. And then from then on, I went to other aspects of the UN's work.
How was your posting in Africa like? I think that's actually quite fascinating to me personally as well, for you to live and work there for 10 years. What are some of the best or maybe even worst memories you have there in your work in Africa? And did you feel that you really, really made a difference of some sort, even in your own personal growth and development as well?
Yeah, the person I married has a lot of influence in this. He happens to be an African American. At that time, it was during the Black Pride movement and all that. So I was very interested in acknowledging his African heritage and wanting to go back there and teach or do something for his people. So we were very excited when we got accepted to Zambia, where he also got a teaching job, and I was a UNDP. Actually, I was a lowly program officer, But what was so exciting was you see for life, for real, the development I read in books about what works, what doesn't, why do certain communities function so well, what is leadership, how do the leaders motivate their people, why is corruption sometimes so endemic and it grows and grows, why? You see everything before your eyes, everything it's not a mystery, it's quite crystal clear. But on top of it, Southern Africa, Zambia in those days when I went, and this is the late 70s, none of these countries were independent. South Africa was not independent. Zimbabwe was not independent. Namibia was not independent. They were still part of the colonial system. So there were a lot of liberation movements happening at that time. The West was starting to admit that the end is near. These countries need to be sovereign and independent. So there was a lot of support for that, and the UN, of course, was the major push to make that happen. So it was just so interesting. You would not believe, you would think I was telling you a fib if I told you that today, these liberation movements, the presidents of Namibia, the former president of South Africa, were my tennis partners. We used to play tennis, especially with the wife of the Thabo Mbeki, the president of South Africa.
That's very fascinating.
Because they lived in Zambia in those days, Kaunda allowed them sanction to live there and operate from there. And to learn from them themselves what the movements were about, and then to interact with the donors who were supporting them. It was just, it's really rare. I mean, one could not expect that. And of course today, today when I see them, it's funny. I'll tell you an anecdote. I ran into the president of Namibia, Hage Geingob, in New York, near Grand Central. And, I was my old self. I said, Hage, I ran up to hug him. He says, Judy, be careful. Do you want to be shot? All the security were around
all the
him.
bodyguards around him.
Around, and I was running up to it. They thought I was trying to maybe a knife in my hand or whatever. But that's what I mean about, having that reality, being so fortunate to live that at that time. And, of course, the children growing up speaking Swahili, it was amazing.
So where was your next posting after Africa?
Yeah, so I went to Kenya after that. And then in the UN, not everybody can go to the field, especially women of childbearing age. How would you go? How would you bring up your children? So a lot of people were scared. So I must say I won some kudos by volunteering to go to not only an African country, but one where a lot of liberation movements were taking place. There was a lot of ammunition around. There was a lot of gun violence, a lot of that. I won't go into it, but it did happen to me too. So when you go to places like that and you actually learn from it and you're willing to share your knowledge of it and you prove to the organization that you're interested in development for real. It's not just a job. You become quite passionate about it. The organization recognizes you, and the organization, wants to reward you. So after I did my 10-year stint, I came back to headquarters, and then I was offered supposedly very good positions. I won't go into them, there are too many. And your reputation develops as somebody who is interested in development, who can speak substantively from experience, and your voice becomes heard. And I guess, having been brought up in an environment where, Columbia University, where you're told to be not too shy to express your opinion, not that I was combative, but I did challenge a lot of conventional wisdoms and all that. And coming from the field, you're credible, you become credible. And it's not a secret. If you're interested in development in the most challenging developing countries, and you lived and worked in them, nobody in the room is more credible than you.
Yes, that's
And
true.
you should use that, not exploit it, but you should not be ashamed or shy to use that to your advantage and to the advantage of educating them.
Yeah. Basically take credit where credit is due, because you did live that experience and you did go through all of it. So,
Right.
Yeah. Sort of like adding on to that, Judy. So I think in international organizations, even the UN nowadays, I feel that it's still very male-dominated. So not even to say about the leadership positions, but even in supervisory positions and all of that, like you do happen to see men, and probably white men, more than any other kind of person. So as a woman and as an Asian woman, throughout your career of 30 years in the UN, do you feel that you actually had more challenges and more specific challenges compared to your other colleagues or even other women who are not Asian per se?
Yes and no. And I became very cognizant of that. I tried to use it strategically as well, because of the element of surprise. Nobody expected an Asian woman, from Malaysia, a Chinese woman of relatively good standing in life, right? They sort of knew from the way you spoke, you went to good universities, you probably came from a middle class background and all that. Nobody expected me to spend 10 years in Africa. And even after that, you know, when I covered humanitarian aid, I used to go back to Somalia and all these places all the time, again, because I really enjoyed that one-on-one experience, that I could say that I spoke to this person and this is what they felt. And that's not true, what you're saying, you know, is that. So it's that element of surprise that when I was there, that what are you doing here? And then when they find out that you're really interested and you do have something to contribute, that makes it an advantage, actually. An advantage. So, you know, like, you would not believe that, but the president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, is very controversial because of the genocide there.
Yes.
And, you know, almost a million people were hacked to death. And he has a semi-authoritarian kind of image, which I think is basically not true, because aside from that, he did so much good in terms of producing results for women, women owning land, women in parliament in Rwanda, would you imagine, is the highest in the world?
Yes.
Because he really believed that when you put a woman in charge, something will happen. You know, so I remember I went to a conference and he said, "Oh, I hear there's a Malaysian woman here. Where is she? Where is she?" Can you imagine? All the African leaders were like stunned. What's going on? Yeah. And it so happened, I know this can be controversial too, but he really admired the way Singapore was able to do a lot of their public programs, public housing, you know, public health and all that. So he wanted to learn from some country, he told me, who could share something. He didn't want rhetoric. He doesn't need to go to another country just to be brotherly or whatever. So actually, he did copy. And in fact, the Secretary General, Guterres, was there apparently a few months ago to Rwanda, to Kigali, and saw the highways, you know, the way they have in Singapore with the median in the middle and whatnot, you know. And he says, wow, you know, this to go from neighboring countries in Central Africa and coming here, this is like Switzerland. He didn't say Singapore, it's like Switzerland. So the point is that I don't know if my being an Asian woman helped, but it didn't hurt. And since Asia itself had done so well to uplift itself, you know, ASEAN basically, it's not just Singapore, ASEAN. Even Malaysia, you know, Malaysia, when I go to conferences with a lot of the Arab states, they are full of admiration for Malaysia because they see it as, you know, another Muslim country, so-called moderate Muslim country making it. So I think, if you ask me, I think it's to my advantage, and I tried to make it even a bigger advantage, not be shy about that. So what I'm saying then, in the end, is, you know, Malaysian women, there's a world out there waiting for you. Go and do your thing and show some of the experiences you have gained, you know, in public health, public housing, in Malaysia in a way, multiracial tolerance and what programs we have, you know, okay, some work, some don't work, but there's a lot to share.
Yes. I also said earlier that to date, there are a very small number of Malaysians who has managed to achieve the pinnacle at UN, like the way you did, Datuk Judy. And even smaller amount of Malaysian women who has managed to make their voices heard on such a large international stage. So building on what you said just now about Malaysian women going out there and sharing, what other advice would you give to the young women to encourage them to maybe spread your wings, join international organizations, and really strive to make a difference on the world stage?
Right. Of course, it's not just the UN. My own daughter is working for IRC, International Rescue Committee, which is working with refugees mainly, because she got the bug, you know. So what I would suggest is, yes, some people are not made for this. They really enjoy the private sector life that Malaysia has to offer, working for law firms, for a bank or whatever. So finance, this is not for them. But for the few who have this curiosity, which I did, and looking at the world today and seeing all the conflicts and why they flare up, you know, why some make it and don't and whatnot, and you want to study it, you want to learn about, read about it, and then you want to be in it, you want to contribute, then that's for you. I don't think we should be held back. And here I'm giving you one side of the story, which is that don't be afraid that by being Asian, you're going to be trampled on. On the contrary, in a way, as for now, we have a pretty good reputation that it could work to your advantage. But more importantly, you should seriously study and read up on the areas you like and the regions that really interest you. It could be the Middle East, or maybe that's too much. It could be Africa, parts of Asia, Southeast Asia. But expertise yourself in it. And you know what? If you're really, really interested, you should find out about the organizations that you're interested in. There's so many. There are humanitarian, development, refugee work, health, so many areas. And this is one very simple advice. You should try and volunteer in your final days at college as an intern in this organization. And I tell that to everybody. I told that to my daughters, and it worked. IRC has nothing to do with the UN. I had no influence. They didn't want to hear from me. It has nothing to do with it. But she interned in a refugee camp in Africa, which shows the interest and the knowledge and the ability to articulate certain truths or not truths. And that's what makes a difference when these organizations look for their entry-level people. Not only was she good at it, did she study it, and she's able to tell us what she learned and what theory she subscribes to, but here she was 3 months, and this is her experience in the 3 months. And this is true not just her. My niece, my friends' daughters and whatnot, in today's age is an open secret. And don't say that, no, I will not go for a non-paying job. That's very short-sighted.
Yes, I agree. Yes.
Very short-sighted. 3 months is not much. No matter, you're not rich, it doesn't matter. 3 months is not much. Basically, also for yourself. Is this what you really want? Is this the kind of life you want? But it's so competitive today. How do you expect an organization to pick you over this person or that person unless you could say something intelligent about what goes on there and you showed your interest and passion in the field? Anyway, today, the secret in the West is you have to do an internship. And when I did mention this to somebody in the third world once, oh no, I'm not going to let my daughter work for free. That is, I said, I'm sorry, that is so short-sighted.
Because I think internships, especially if NGOs where they are non-profit, they will actually really make the interns work. You go to the ground, you communicate with the community. And I think that's very valuable experience where paying jobs actually couldn't get you in some sense.
But the other side is within the UN now, I think they realize that they do have to pay a little. So it's not anything that you would expect, but it's a little kind of pocket money.
Kind of like an allowance for travel and food and whatnot.
For the subway or whatever.
But do you feel that for women especially, it's still difficult for them to achieve a leadership kind of position? Because I was just thinking about your experiences of where you got to in the UN. So you were very highly ranked as Assistant Secretary General. But I think in one of your writings for Free Malaysia Today, you did mention that in international organizations, you still don't see women at the top.
Right.
So I think sometimes talking about glass ceilings can be a little bit controversial. But what's your take on that?
Well, I think the statistics speak 1,000 words. I mean, the opinion piece I wrote is based on reality. It's at the top level of these internet. The WHO's, the UNICEF has a good track record and all that. Is in a way, as I think I even used the word, the hypocrisy. Passing resolution year after year about women this and women that, and then we haven't seen a woman sitting in the top spot.
You don't practice it within your own organization.
There's no other word for it but hypocrisy. The qualified people are there. They have as many PhDs as the men, or whatever you want, So the key there is to keep pushing. I belong to this group called the Global Women for Leadership. It's a lot of former ASGs and USGs that advocate for this. And so at that top level is the continuing application at the level of states, heads of state, writing to heads of states, other organizations that have influence. But at the not at the middle level, at the professional levels, I think all these organizations get it now. In fact, when I joined UNDP way back, I entered under a so-called affirmative action program. They had targets of how many women they wanted at the professional level, this level and this level, and I got in through that, and I even joined the action group that monitored that these targets were met. So maybe it fell off the center stage for a while, but it's back on it. The key is to keep pushing, But when you look at the statistics, for instance, I sat on Ban Ki-moon's cabinet. and we have a meeting once or twice a week with his cabinet. When I joined in the 1970s, I would go to that meeting with the big boss only because I was a good writer. I also had a double degree. I wanted to be a journalist, so I could write quite well and fast. So they would bring me to the meeting, but I was a note taker. And I used to be so intimidated sitting around this big table with a Secretary General, all men. I was the only one, the note taker, sitting in the back. And then fast forward today, at the last meetings when Ban Ki-moon, more women than men around the table. And not only more women, feisty women, talkative women, expressive women that were not going to take, any nonsense from any generalizations. So it's a whole different scene from what I saw at the top as well. Not the top, because those statistics are still pathetic, but at the level of the cabinet of the SG. And then now when you look at the entry level, I think the targets are still being followed. And in the op-ed I wrote, I challenge organizations to publicize what their targets are. It's only when you publicize it do the bureaucrats get serious about implementing it, right? If you keep it under some drawer, nobody will know whether it's ever implemented or not.
I think gender equality has come a long way, but we still have a very long way to go. And I still feel that women sometimes are still quite unfairly stereotyped in a way, and especially Asian women. So I think you also did speak about things like mentorship in the past as well, and how do we break out of that stereotype, and can women find a mentor to help them do that, or is it something within themselves that they have to break out of their own stereotypes perhaps before they could break the stereotypes of other people? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think first, as you say, you're right, break out of their own. We have that. I don't know to what extent it's fast fading, but my niece always used to tell me in a very naughty way. She'll say, "You're 2 generations from Bound Feet, so don't talk so big." Your grand aunt had Bound Feet, remember her? So she puts me in my place. But also reality check, right? Yeah. So I think our culture is such that women, you're seen but not heard. Now you're welcome to sit at the table, but really nobody's asking for your opinion on anything. And it's for us to change that, Okay, and then when we do get accepted into international organizations, a few changed their ways. I certainly did. I certainly knew I couldn't act like the way I acted in front of my grandfather and grandmother. So, in a lot of my talks with Asian universities, for trying to promote women's leadership, be conscious of that. Be really aware of that. Like, for instance, I noticed a lot of times, in meetings, the women would not immediately go sit in the front row. Why not? Why you have to be in the middle or the back? And then number 2, they don't raise their hand to speak, maybe towards the end of the meeting when they want to add something. And I'm saying that because I've noticed it myself. And it's very simple. If you don't raise your hand, you're already invited to the meeting, so you're senior enough that people want to hear all the opinions. So raise your hand, but first think about what you want to contribute, so you don't make a fool of yourself.
Not speaking for just the sake of speaking, right?
That is the most obnoxious thing, right? So you take a pad and a pencil and you jot down they're missing the point, they're not saying this, and so jot down the points, raise your hand, take a deep breath, and say in as succinct a manner as you can what your point is. Because otherwise, how would anyone in the room know what you stand for? You can actually speak, you can actually have an opinion, and hey, that's a pretty good opinion. How would people have an opinion on you? When it comes time to inviting others to another meeting, or maybe even inviting you for the short list for a new position, how would anyone know what you stood for? But the downside, of course, is don't keep doing it for the sake of doing it, so you become the reputation of being obnoxious. Here's that girl who can't stop talking. That's the last thing you want, right?
Yeah.
So that I give as a tip to a lot of people, and because I sit there and I see, why you should say something, but collect your thoughts, not all the time, So break that stereotype, and then in public meetings especially, where opinions are made, be strategic. Where are opinions made? Where is the boss that you want to impress sitting? Don't be afraid. He's sitting right there. So you happen to know that he or she likes this topic. express yourself. I think that's the number one thing I would say to people who come from cultures that are too shy. And
I think you've also spoken in the past about women needing to be strategic when it comes to career advancement. Can you perhaps elaborate a little bit more about that? But what do you mean when you talk about women needing to be strategic and basically using your strengths in a strategic way?
Yeah, so I think, I did a podcast on mentoring and sponsorship. If people are interested, they can listen to that podcast, which goes a lot more into detail about mentoring and sponsorship. But about being strategic, a lot of times you have to move, basically. If you're working for international organizations, assuming that they're big enough, right? A lot of the big NGOs and the big UN, it's all about moving. You cannot stay in the same place. But how do you plan on your next move? So be a bit calculating. What are the people, the big decision makers of that particular post? What are they looking for? And be strategic. Plan, in fact, how you want to build up yourself in order to qualify for that. It could be going to live in a particular refugee camp for a few months so that you can speak about that issue. It could even be changing your field a little bit, going to take a refresher course at a good institution, building up your technical know-how in a particular decision. But don't just sit there and say, I want that job, I'm going to apply for that job. What is behind that? What will make you stand apart, especially when it's very competitive? A lot of times, actually, I get offered or I told that I'm shortlisted or qualified for this job versus this job when I've already stayed 4 or 5 years in my current and I'm ready to move. So a lot of times, I actually have a piece of paper, a balance sheet in front of me, the advantage of this versus this. This could give me immediate satisfaction because it's a field I know, I'm comfortable with. The boss is wonderful. We're friends. And I'll be in a comfortable environment where I'll be supported. I'll be happy. But guess what? I'll probably stay there for years and years and not move. But if I took the other job, which is a bit of a risk, because I have to do this and this and this, I'm not going to go into them. But when you look at my CV, there are many cases where I actually went to jobs that I really knew very little about. So I was really taking a risk. But I figured out it would open me up to this field. I would have to force myself to learn about it. It will expose me to these other fields that are related to this.
Basically pushing yourself out of your comfort zone.
Out of your comfort zone. Really, exactly right. Pushing yourself out of your comfort zone and not to be afraid to take that risk. And if you goofed, you goofed, then you're probably back at square one where you're going to be anyway. So
and that's not the worst thing in the world.
No.
Yeah.
No, it's not the worst thing, but calculated risk. As I said, I actually sit down with the balance sheet and I put the pros and cons, and then I decide.
I think that's a good advice for any young person, young women starting out in their careers as well.
Right, because they're afraid to think of the unthinkable, right? Oh no, I'm going to move out of this job that I love, this boss I love. So consider all things.
And sometimes you just need to do what's the best for yourself as well, when after your considerations. Thank you so much, Datuk Judy. I think we've reached the end of our session today. Thank you for being with us. Any last pearls of wisdom for our young listeners before we sign off?
Well, whenever I come home, I meet men and women. And I know there's a lot of controversy here about our educational system and all that. But I'm impressed. I'm really impressed by a lot of the young people I speak to and their interests. And then I ask them, what are you doing? Of course, everybody's doing something really fantastic. But I will ask, have you ever considered international life or a job in this area? And you know what? A lot of times, they're almost scared to answer me. They're almost scared to answer me because, in a way, because you can't deny it. Life is comfortable in Malaysia, right? We have no natural disasters. We have no war. And when you go to other countries where people are a bit more desperate, the first thing they'll say is, oh, can I come and see you in your office? Can you introduce me to this one? I don't hear that here. So I don't know what that means. I leave it to you.
Thank you, Datuk Judy. Thanks to everyone for tuning in today. Thank you.
Thank you.